We've all heard this narrative when listening to spiritual stories of how somebody finally became self-realized. And it goes along the lines of, I tried for years and I did all these practices. And then one day I just forgot about the whole thing, let go, and suddenly it happened. And then I realized that all I had to do was to let go. Or it could take the guise of, I was doing all these practices, I was working very hard and whatever. And then my ego got to the point where it realized that it stood no chance. It tired itself out from seeking, and then it gave up on the seeking, and then the transformation took place. My name is Pablo. This channel is Meditation Amsterdam, and today I want to try and clarify what's missing from these narratives that gives you the impression that if only you found out the right way to realize what you're missing, then you would become self-realized. Or if only you just let go, then you could become self-realized. And I think there's a real possibility of that maybe happening, but there's also a possibility that you need a lot of work to have it take place. You see, these narratives are not inaccurate, they're just incomplete. They are presenting you with a subjective view and a retrospective story about how it took place. And it is as if I was to tell you, hey, the big bad wolf was blowing and blowing and blowing on a house. And then when it stopped caring about it, as soon as he turned around, the thing collapsed. And then he realized, I had to do nothing after all. Well, maybe the blowing did have some effect on the house, and we're here to explore that. We're here to try to give a bridge and a vehicle to prime the mind for these realizations to arise, so that later on we can recount correctly what the process is. When we only rely on our internal subjective experience of what's happening, we may not be privy to the neurological processes that are taking place when we do self-cultivation practices. These processes create changes in the mind that make it possible for insights and releases to take place. The mind will not release so long as it doesn't feel like it's a plausible or safe move to do so. When it releases, it is not a doing, it's kind of a happening, but it's not a random happening. It's a happening that takes place on the base of conditions that have been cultivated, such as the ability to self-regulate, such as a higher level of integration between the mind and the body, such as the becoming acquainted with and becoming tolerant of higher levels of somatic distress, which would otherwise we would try to suppress and push down. When some of those conditions, also the clarity about the somatics, start to increase, then the likelihood of insights and letting goes or lettings go becomes very, very high and almost becomes inevitable. And then if we are not privy to the effect that the practices have on those neurological conditions, and we simply practice without knowing these things, one day the letting go happens and we say, if I only knew that none of that was useful. It's very tempting to fall under that assumption, but it is not a correct assumption, and it hardly provides any vehicle that is followable or plausible for knowing how to get from A to B. So what I would invite you to do in this brief video is don't underestimate the value of neuroscience and psychology in the process that you're following. It is not just a mystical process based on grace, random occurrences and things of the kind. In the greater scheme of things, maybe it is. It is all one big mystery after all. But in the bits and pieces that are apparently taking place in the relative, there is work to do. The work is effective, is predictably effective if it is done conscientiously and correctly and in a well-informed manner. And the question that we should always be asking ourselves is not so much how do I obtain mystical grace, or how do I randomly let go in a way that works? But what are the conditions that need to be in place for the mind to feel as if it can let go? And then the let go will happen on its own. It's true that it happens on its own, but it doesn't happen randomly. The letting go happens when conditions are met for that letting go to take place and for insights to arrive. So if you think that this is content that other people would benefit from, you can share it. Curious to hear your comments. You can like and subscribe the video. And as usual, I'll be back with more pretty soon. And until then, cheerio and thanks for listening.